Hi folks, so this is our second video in our introduction to the IS and LM model. Here we're going to be tracing out, this is the IS, and you may be curious, what does IS stand for? Well, basically it's that investment equal to savings, and it's another way of saying that output is equal in equilibrium to the sum of investment of consumption expenditures and investment expenditures, government expenditures, and net exports. And you have to remember that that's planned investment. So it's an equilibrium where we don't have any unplanned inventory accumulation or decumulation. So anyway, that is approximately, that's basically telling us that our investment is equal to our savings. So the idea here is that um, uh, we want to show how interest rates can affect demand, because we have argued that that there are certain elements of expenditures that are sensitive to the interest rate, and we focused on investment as sensitive to the interest rate. Um, and we've done that for kind of simplicity, because also you may be asking, well, also aren't consumers sensitive to interest rates? And that's true, but we've wanted to keep kind of things simple here. So let's just focus on investment. And the other thing is that we're going to be using the multiplier tool to sort of to develop this IS curve. So the basic idea is this: is that we have assumed that or we've reasoned, we've argued that when interest rates rise, all else equal, firms will find it less profitable to invest in that next project. Okay, the cost of capital has risen, borrowing costs have risen, and that when they compare, let's say, that next project that they might have been doing that might be kind of on the borderline, what we call a marginal project, when we compare that to, let's say, the rate of return that they would get on a bond, when all of a sudden interest rates rise, we find, well, golly gee, why this project, it was kind of iffy, but we might as well just put our resources into some other investment and perhaps wait until interest rates come back down, something like that. So in any event, we want to factor those interest rate changes into a multiplier model. Okay, so let's go here to our tool, and you will recognize here, over here in the over on the left hand side, the familiar Keynesian cross. And the only thing that's going to be different now is that, okay, in the last time, okay, when we showed the Keynesian cross in the initial example, we showed the red line, the red expenditure line, shifting when, let's say, government expenditures shifted, what we call autonomous changes to spending. It could also be from households, but we focused on government spending. But that's not the only thing that can shift that curve. What we're going to argue is that changes in interest rates can also shift that curve. So under a baseline scenario, we've started off with an interest rate, a real interest rate. Remember, that's the nominal interest rate minus inflation. We've started off with a little bit under 3%. And why did we do that? That historically has been the value. Now, in recent years, actually, real interest rates have been substantially lower. We'll be talking about that later on in this course, as we in fact, in another module. But for right now, let's just, I mean, we could choose any interest rate, but let's just go with this 2.8 interest rate, especially because it fits in very well with the spreadsheet graphics. So in any event, now let us suppose that the interest rate under scenario B, or instance B, rises, and let's just say it rises, what we say, 1%, 100 basis points, from 2.8 to 3.8. So I'm going to put in my 3.8 here, okay, and as you can imagine, okay, because we already told you that when interest rates rise, you're going to have a reduction in spending, mainly through the investment channel. We should see a downward shift in this curve, and there it is. Okay, so the idea is that when households and when firms see the interest rate rise, as we argued before, they're going to be cutting back on those planned investments, and once again, that's going to ripple through the economy. Okay, so one firm and then spends a little bit less, then another firm spends a little bit less, and you're going to get that multiplier effect, and you're going to get down here to point B. Okay. Now let's try another example. Let's suppose that interest rates fall by 100 basis points. So let's just put 1.8 in here, okay? And surprise, surprise, now you saw the curve shift upward. You saw the curve shift upward here to point C because now firms are spending more, okay? So these points A, B, and C actually, we can actually trace out a whole family of these points, an infinite number of these points, and they would lie upon this line here, and this line tells us the equilibrium combination of output and interest rates. And another way of thinking about this is that along this line, output is an aggregate supply, Y is equal to aggregate demand, or the aggregate expenditures, including planned investment, no unplanned investment. So that's Y. That's your old Y is equal C plus I plus G plus X minus IM. Now we haven't really talked about the open economy here, but it would hold it true here. So we could think of this as a closed economy for one second. But in any event, okay, the idea here is that if we, so long as we're on this curve, okay, that we've traced out, the aggregate supply is equal to aggregate demand. Now, what would happen if we were off this curve? Well, if we're over to the right of the curve, that would mean that aggregate demand is less than aggregate supply, and we would have face less spending and face some downward pressures on the interest rate because people aren't clamoring for those funds. And down here, aggregate demand would be greater than the aggregate supply. So in order to bring the demand back into in line with supply, you would have to see an increase in interest rates to sort of choke off that demand. So that's how we get this downward sloping curve. Okay, we have just derived the IS curve, and we've given you this learning tool so that you can do it yourself. Now, if we look over here, there's another thing we want to say, that once again, okay, we're not leaving the autonomous shifts in expenditures behind. Those are still there. So let's say, for example, that the government increases spending by 1%. Okay, you see we put it there. We get this shift of the curve to the right and upward, okay, more spending. Or if we have what we call an austerity package, -1 here, we would get a shift to the left, okay? So we have derived the IS curve. We've done it by tracing out points on the multiplier, using our initial multiplier analysis, and we've got that curve, and then we've shown how this curve can shift. We hope that you find this learning tool to be useful. Thank you.